This is Unit 3, Video 1 of U.S. History, and in this video we're going to look at the Articles of Confederation. During the American Revolution, the U.S. government was created under this Articles of Confederation. The Articles deliberately created a government that gave most of the power to the states rather than the federal government because they feared a monarchy like they had just rebelled against in Britain. The weakness of the articles, however, were numerous, and it led many to call for a stronger national government, something stronger than the articles. First, we'll look at the strengths of the articles, and in terms of managing new territory, the articles were quite successful. Because the 1783 Treaty of Paris gave the United States Britain's land all the way to the Mississippi River, this was land that Americans wanted to settle. The Land Ordinance of 1785 was created under the Articles of Confederation, and this was one example of a success of the Articles. It divided the new land into 6 square mile townships, and then the revenue from the 16th section of each of those townships would be used to fund and establish public schools. So they divided those 6 square mile townships into 1 by 1 squares, and then the 16th one that they sold, that's what they used to fund public education. The extra income from the other squares also helped the nation pay off many of its war debts that they had from the Revolutionary War to many European countries. Your first question asks you, how was the Land Ordinance of 1785 a strength of the Articles? And really because it showed the U.S. wanted to expand, and so it dealt well, it managed Western lands well. And so how would that be a strength? It showed that the U.S. was intent on expanding, and it also showed that it was going to be orderly and organized fashion. Look at another strength. The land north and west of the Ohio River became known as the Northwest Territory, and you can see on the map what territory we're talking about. It's modern-day Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Part of Minnesota here, but mostly those first 5 states. It was the first territory created outside of the original 13 colonies which became states, and in 1787 Congress passed the Northwest Ordinance. The ordinance showed Americans that their government intended on expanding westward, which was a big deal because many Americans at the time were colonists during the Proclamation of 1763 when the king had prohibited any migration west of the Appalachians. It angered many of the colonists, and so this Northwest Ordinance showed that this new government intended on expansion. The ordinance set up procedures for how a territory could become a state, and the process had several steps until finally a state was required to have a population of at least 60,000 people, and when they did that, they could become a state. Also, for the first time ever, we have a federal ban placed on slavery in this region. So those 5 states, the area north of the Ohio River, a federal ban was placed on slavery, so slavery was outlawed in that region. So your question there asks you, and the standard is specific in knowing how the Northwest Ordinance impacted these 4 things. So in terms of slavery, it banned it. Slavery was banned in the Northwest Ordinance, and that was the first time a federal ban had been placed on slavery. The second one asks about public education, and so we talked about this with the township, but also with the Northwest Ordinance. Some of the land that was sold, those funds went into public education to help run that and pay for it and finance it. The third one asks about the addition of new states. So how did the Northwest Ordinance impact the addition of new states? If a territory wanted to become a state, it had to follow these procedures. It had to set up their government, and then ultimately they had to get 60,000 people there. So it made a way for other territories to become equal states with the original 13. And then the last part asks about westward migration, and clearly the Northwest Ordinance is going to impact that because it's going to encourage people to move west into this land and settle it. Now we'll look at the weakness of the Articles, and there's really more of these than there are strengths. The Articles only had a Congress, that's it. No Supreme Court, which is a judicial branch, no executive branch like a president to enforce Congress's laws, and we talked about a little bit why that is, and because they feared this strong central government. They were afraid that it would become too powerful. The Congress also lacked the power to tax. Now, they could ask the states for funds, but if the states chose not to pay, Congress couldn't do anything about it. And so very little money came in as a result, which you probably could guess that. The federal government under the Articles also lacked the power to regulate what is called interstate trade, or so trade between the states. And they also had no national currency, so each state had their own money, and so it was a very disjointed union. And all of these weaknesses negatively impacted the new nation. You can see here a little political cartoon of Congress asking the states for money. Please help us, but the states did not have to oblige. A couple of questions here. Why were the Articles of Confederation created as a weak form of government? And we've mentioned that a couple of times, but it is because of their experiences under the monarchy of England. They do not want a strong central government, which they feel is going to take many of their rights away. And so much of it comes out of fear from experience they've had with Great Britain. And so I ask you to list a couple of the weaknesses there for the Articles. There were several that we mentioned, but one was they didn't have the power to tax. Another, no national currency, no executive branch, no judicial branch, couldn't regulate interstate trade. So there were several there that you would at least need to be familiar with. Another weakness was Shays Rebellion. And this was a rebellion in Massachusetts during this time that made many question and really seek a replacement for the Articles of Confederation. Daniel Shays, who was a farmer in Massachusetts, led a mob of more than 1,000 other farmers who were overburdened with debts. They tried to seize a federal arsenal, and they also shut down many of the courts which were foreclosing on their farms. So their hope was that if we shut down the courts, then they can't take our land from us. But it really got out of hand, and Shays Rebellion is what it comes to be known. It convinced many in the U.S. that a stronger national government was needed. It was really the death knell for the Articles because they really lost support after Shays Rebellion showed just how weak they were. Your question here asks, how did Shays Rebellion change the way many Americans view the Articles and the role of the federal government? So it gave many a negative view of the Articles. It made many question whether or not the Articles was the right government for the United States, and they wanted the federal government to take a little bit larger role in the federal or in the government itself, even if that meant handing over some of the power to the federal government.